All right, welcome back to the course after the long weekend. So today's topic will be about comparative statics, and it's simply about changes in demand and supply. And to review, we would like to identify the shifters that affect the demand and supply, as well as to differentiate the difference between movement along versus the shift of the whole demand supply curves. Okay, and then afterwards we'll discuss the questions and to complete the attendance exercise as usual. So let's start with the demand shifters first. So 5 points are listed here. The first one is about income of consumers. So we have normal goods and inferior goods under this point. So normal goods is saying that when your income increases, your demand for this kind of good will increase. So the example I use here will be poke bowl, right? So when your income increases, then the demand for these kind of cuisines, okay, right, the better food would increase. Okay, so the demand for normal goods will increase as a result of an increase in income. While for inferior goods, the example I use here will be cursory rice or 頹飯. Right, so when you have high income, then your demand for this kind of 頹飯 or the poor food would decrease, right? So high income demand for inferior good would fall. All right, the second point, population size. So when the population size increases, then the demand for the good increases. So a simple example is like when there are 5,000 people in the population, then you need 5,000 bowls of rice. While if there are now 8,000 people in the population, then you need 8,000 bowls of rice. So the demand for rice will increase as a result of the increase in the population size. All right, the third point, price-related goods. So we have substitutes and complements here. So for substitutes, the example I use will be Coke and Sprite. So both of them are soft drinks that satisfy your wants in a similar manner. So if the price of Coke increases, then you will consume less of Coke and to shift away and to consume more of Sprite instead. And in this case, the price and quantity transacted of Sprite will increase. Okay, so this is about substitutes, right? The price of the two goods will increase or move in the same direction. While for complements, the example I use here will be cereal and milk. Right, so likely you would not like to consume cereal alone because it is too dry. So you would like to have milk to accompany with your cereal consumption. So if the price of cereal increases, then you would need less milk to accompany with your cereal consumption. So the demand for milk would fall, and thus the price and also the quantity transacted of milk would fall. And from here, for complements, the price of the two goods will move in an opposite direction. Okay, so the fourth point is about the expectation of future price. So if you as a consumer foresee the future price to increase, then you would buy more of the product at the moment. So your current demand for the good will increase. While the fifth point, taste or preference. So a simple example is like if it is a hot weather, then your demand for ice cream will increase, right? You would like to consume more of cooler food. Okay, so afterwards, we have the supply shifters. So 5 points again. The first one is technology. So with better technology, then you can produce more with the same amount of input. And the second point, input prices. So if the price of input increases, then this means that your cost of production will increase. So this would lead to a fall in the supply of the good. And the third point, not only the future price affects the demand side, it also affects the supply side. So this time, imagine you as a producer. If you foresee the future price to increase, then you will hold the product and not to sell it at the moment. So your current supply of the good would fall. And the fourth point, entry or exit of producers. So naturally, if there are more producers, then the supply of the good will increase, vice versa. And finally, price of competitive supply. So competitive supply means that the two goods use the same input or the resources in production. So the example I use here will be vegetables and fruits. So imagine you are a farmer who owns a farmland that could plant vegetables and fruits. So if the price of vegetables increases, then you would plant more of vegetables and less of fruits instead. So the supply of fruits would fall. And ultimately, the price of fruits would increase, while the quantity transacted of fruits would fall. So this is about the shifters. And the final thing to review is to differentiate the movement along versus the shift of the demand supply curve. So as we have learned in chapter 3, we are talking about the change in quantity demanded or quantity supplied, okay? And the change in QD or change in QS is due to the change in the price of the good itself, right? So if there's an increase in price, by the law of demand, we know that the quantity demanded would drop, right? Vice versa, ceteris paribus. While from the law of supply, we know that the quantity supplied will increase as a result of an increase in price, right? So this is what we have learned in the last chapter. But in this chapter about comparative statics, we are talking about change in other factors that lead to a shift of the demand or supply curve. Okay, so it's for the shift of the whole curve, it is caused by changing factors other than the price of the goods itself. Okay, an example would be like the price of comparative supply, right? So if you're talking about the demand supply diagram of fruits, okay, so if there's an increase in the price of vegetables, then this would be the change in the price of other goods, okay, instead of the price of the goods itself. And in particular, this would lead to a change in supply or a fall in the supply of fruits. Okay, so this is about a shift of the whole curve, illustrating the comparative statics. And to conclude, if there's a change in the demand or the supply curve, it is caused by exogenous factors. That is, factors that is determined outside the demand supply model. Okay, so make sure you understand the difference between movement along the curve versus the shift of the whole curve. Right, so that's all for this review part, and we'll move on to the discussion question. So please take a look first. Okay, so for the first blank, we're going to determine whether good X is a normal good or inferior good. So we'd like to see how a change in income affect the demand for good X. So let's see. When the income increases, then negative 0.7 times income, this expression would decrease. And finally, the whole expression on the right-hand side would decrease, and thus the demand for good X would decrease as a result of an increase in income. So this is why good X is an inferior good, right? It fits into the definition of inferior goods. So how about the second blank? We are going to determine the relationship between goods X and Y, whether they are complements or substitutes to each other. So we'd like to observe how a change in the price of good Y affects the demand for good X. Okay, so let's see. When PY increases, then 2 times PY will also increase. And thus, the whole expression on the right-hand side will increase. This means that when there's an increase in PY, the demand for good X will increase. Okay, so since the price of good Y and the demand for good X move in the same direction, this means that goods X and Y are substitutes to each other. So the correct answer to question 1 is boy. Okay, so what I've put down here is essentially what I've just explained to you. So please take a look at question 2. Okay, so let's go through the statements one by one. The first one, coefficient B is positive. So the coefficient B is the coefficient in front of Px, right? So we are talking about the supply curve, and we'd like to observe how is the relationship between the price of good X and the quantity supplied of good X. So normally, we know that they should move in the same direction, right? When the price of good X increases, then the quantity supplied of good X will also increase, right? By the law of supply. So we would like to have B to be positive so that Px and Qx move in the same direction. So statement one is true. Well, for statement two, coefficients D and E are both 0. So D and E are the coefficients in front of income and population. So how does a change in income or a change in population affect the supply of the good? It should have no impact, right? Because income and population are demand shifters. It should have no impact on the supply of the goods. So we would like to have D and E to be 0, such that a change in income or a change in population have no effect on the supply of good X. So statement 2 is also correct. Right, so this completes question 2, and please take a look at question 3. Okay, so we are going to determine which of the factor lead to a decrease in price and an increase in quantity transacted. So recall, for a change in demand, the price and quantity transacted should move in the same direction, while for a change in supply, the price and quantity transacted would move in an opposite direction. So here, since the price would decrease while the quantity transacted increase, so this is actually opposite change. So it is about a change in supply. And in particular, we are talking about an increase in supply in this case. This is essentially applying the technique of inference to determine which of the demand supply curves moved. Okay. So we are going to determine which of the factors will lead to an increase in supply or rightward shift in supply. So let's see. A, an expectation that the product's own price will increase in the future. So if you as a producer foresee the future price to increase, then you will hold the product and not to sell it at the moment, right? So your current supply of the goods should decrease. So A is false. While for B, an advance in the production technology. So if there's a better technology, then you can produce more, right? The increase in supply. So B is the correct answer. But let's still take a look at C and D anyways. For C, an increase in the product's own price. So remember, when there's an increase in the price, then this would lead to an increase in quantity supplied, not an increase in supply. So differentiate between the movement versus the curve or the shift of the whole curve. So C is leading to an increase in quantity supply, not an increase in supply. All right, and finally, D, endorsement of the product by a popular celebrity. So imagine you are a consumer buying the product and you are watching the advertisement by the popular celebrity, then you will be more attracted to the product. Then the demand for the good will increase. And anyway, this is affecting the demand side of the good instead of the supply side. Okay, so the only correct answer to this part is B. Okay, so please take a look at question 4. Okay, so we are talking about the market of residential property, and we have two events occurring in this question. So let's observe how they affect the demand and supply respectively. So if the population of Hong Kong increases, then the demand for residential property will increase, right? People need to live in a house. So demand will increase, which is illustrated by a rightward shift in demand. So it will move from D to D1. Okay, so this is the first part. For the second part, the wage rate of local construction workers rises. So this talking about the production cost of residential property, right? So the cost of building those residential property would increase, and this would lead to a decrease in supply of residential property, and is represented by a leftward shift in supply. Okay, a decrease in supply is represented by a leftward shift in supply. So the curve will shift from S to S1. To determine the new equilibrium point, it is simply the intersection between the new demand and new supply. So the intersection between D1 and S1 will give us the answer. Okay, E1 is the new equilibrium point. All right, so that's all for question 4, and we'll move on to the next one. Please take a look. Okay, so we have two events occurring here, and we'd like to determine how the equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity changes. So for this kind of question, we would like to analyze how each event affects the price and quantity transacted respectively, and then to draw an overall conclusion to determine the overall change. So let me go through the detail to show what I exactly mean. Okay, so event 1, the discovery of cheaper synthetic vanilla flavoring lowers the price of vanilla ice cream. So by the way, we are considering the market of chocolate ice cream in this question, right? Okay. So obviously, vanilla ice cream and chocolate ice cream are substitutes to each other. So if the price of vanilla ice cream falls, then people would consume more of vanilla ice cream and shift away to consume less of chocolate ice cream. So the demand for chocolate ice cream would fall. Okay. So how does a decrease in demand affect the price and the quantity transacted of the good? So both should decrease, right? So this is the impact aroused by event 1. But for event 2, the rental of machine for mixing and freezing chocolate ice cream increases. So this is talking about the production cost of chocolate ice cream. So higher production cost, then the supply of the good would fall. Okay. So how does a decrease in supply affect the price and quantity transacted? The price should increase while the quantity transacted should fall, right? So this is about the impact caused by event 2. And we are now ready to draw an overall conclusion to determine how the equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity of chocolate ice cream changes. Right? So for the price, since a decrease in demand would lead to a decrease in price, while the decrease in supply will lead to an increase in price. So one decrease while the other increase. So we are uncertain about the overall change in equilibrium price. And it depends on the magnitude of the shift. While for the equilibrium quantity, since both the decrease in demand and decrease in supply would lead to a fall in equilibrium quantity, so we are sure that the overall change in quantity must be a decrease. So this is how we can conclude this problem. The equilibrium price is uncertain, while the equilibrium quantity must fall. All right, so this is basically what I put down here for you about question 5. And we'll now move on to question 6. And if you go 2 slides forward, there's the following scenario about the same problem. So please spend some time to glance through the first scenario first. Okay, so the first 4 parts is talking about the case where the taxi license policy is in place. And we're going to figure out the price, quantity, as well as the consumer surplus and producer surplus in this scenario. Okay, let's determine the equilibrium point first, which is found by the intersection between the market demand and market supply. So for the market demand, nothing special, just the expression directly given here, P equals to 150 minus Q. Okay, which is illustrated by the downward sloping green line. How about the supply? The special thing is that the government is issuing limited 60 license in the taxi market. So this means that when the quantity is lower than 60, then nothing special. We just use the supply expression directly given the question, P equals to Q. Okay. However, when the quantity supply reaches 60, no matter how high the market price is, the quantity cannot be further increased. So this is why we have the vertical line at the quantity of 60. Okay, because the quantity supply cannot be further increased. So this is why the yellow highlighted part is the supply of taxi in this case. Okay, it's a Kant curve. So to determine the equilibrium point is simply the intersection between the downward sloping green demand and the yellow Kant supply. So point B would be the equilibrium point. The x coordinate will be giving us the equilibrium quantity 60, while the y coordinate will be giving us the equilibrium price 90. Okay, so parts 3 and 4 about the consumer surplus and producer surplus. So let's recall their definitions. Consumer surplus is total benefit minus total expenditure, while producer surplus is total revenue minus total variable cost. So let's apply the definition to observe where the areas is located at. Okay, so for total benefit, it will be area under the demand curve until the market equilibrium point. So this orange trapezium is the total benefit at the market equilibrium point. For the total expenditure, it is the equilibrium price multiplied by the equilibrium quantity. So this green rectangle will be the total expenditure at the market equilibrium point. Okay, so this explains why the consumer surplus is the orange trapezium minus the green rectangle, which is essentially the blue triangle on top here. Okay, so using a polygon function in GeoGebra, it will help you calculate the area of the triangle on top, right? Just click the vertices of this triangle, and then it will help you to find the area, which is given by 1,800, right? Triangle ABC has an area 1,800. While for the producer surplus, it is total revenue minus total variable cost. So total revenue, again, is the price times quantity, the same green rectangle. While for total variable cost, it will be the area under the supply curve until the market equilibrium point. So this red triangle is the total variable cost in this case. And finally, the producer surplus is the green rectangle minus the red triangle, which is the purple trapezium here. Okay, so again, using a polygon function in GeoGebra, it will help you calculate the area of this produced surplus, which is 3,600. All right, so this is the first part, and please spend some time to have a look at this case where the government is abolishing the taxi license policy. Okay, so let's start with parts 5 and 6 to find the consumer surplus and producer surplus when the taxi license policy is abolished. So if the policy is abolished, then the supply would just go back to the usual upward sloping shape given by the expression P equals to Q. Then the consumer surplus is just the upper triangle here, the orange triangle, while the producer surplus is the triangle below here, the green triangle. So nothing special, we just use the polygon function in GeoGebra to help us quickly find out the areas, which is both 2,800 and 12.5. All right, so part 7 and part 8, consumers as a group is willing to spend up to what amount to lobby the government for the abolishment, while the producer as a group is willing to spend up to how many dollars to lobby the government against the abolishment. After the abolishment of the taxi license policy, the consumer surplus will increase from 1,800 to 2,800 and something, right? So an increase in consumer surplus by 1,012.5. So consumers as a group are willing to pay up to the increase in consumer surplus for the government to abolish the taxi license policy. While on the same token, after the abolishment of the taxi license policy, the producer surplus decreased from 3,600 to 2,800 and something, a decrease in producer surplus by 787.5. So producers as a group is willing to spend up to the decrease in producer surplus to lobby the government and not to abolish the taxi license policy. Okay, so this for questions 7 and 8. And for parts 9 and 10, we're going to find the minimum and the maximum amount that the government should tax consumers to transfer the amount for the producers so that two groups are happy with the abolishment of the taxi license. So to make both groups happy with the abolishment, then both groups should have a higher gain taking into account the transfer. So because we know that the abolishment will lead to a fall in producer surplus by this amount, right? So this means that the producers has to be compensated at least the decrease in producer surplus so that they will be happy with the abolishment. While at the same time, the maximum compensation is constrained by this amount, the increase in consumer surplus after the abolishment. So the if the tax on consumers is even greater than this amount, then the consumers would eventually suffer from a loss after the abolishment. So this means that the transfer has to be smaller than the increase in consumer surplus. All right, so this explains the two numbers here. And finally, question 11. If the abolishment of taxi license involved an implementation cost C, the government will not consider the abolishment policy if C is larger than what amount. So it's actually the cost and benefit analysis of the government, which is the government should not implement the policy when the implementation cost is greater than the benefit of the policy. So the cost side is the implementation cost C that we are going to look for, while the benefit of the policy is the increase in total economic surplus after the abolishment of the policy. Before the abolishment of the taxi license, okay, when the taxi license is in place, then the consumer surplus and producer surplus is 1,800 plus 3,600. While after the abolishment of the taxi license, the new consumer surplus and the new producer surplus are these two amounts. So the new total economic surplus is the sum of these two values, so which gives us here. Okay, so the increase in total economic surplus will be 225. This means that if the implementation cost C is greater than 225, then the government should just do nothing and not to abolish the tax license. Okay, so that's all for question 6, the lengthy problem here, and please take a look at this problem. So let me explain statements 1, 2, and 4 together, which are talking about the leftward shift in supply or a decrease in supply. So let's observe how the producer surplus and total revenue would change first. Okay, so when there's a decrease in supply, the equilibrium price would increase while the equilibrium quantity would fall. So this is also illustrated in the diagram below here. First of all, about the producer surplus. So imagine you as a producer. So an increase in price is a good thing, while a decrease in quantity is a bad thing. So one would increase the producer surplus, while the other would lead to a fall in producer surplus. So we are uncertain about the overall change in producer surplus. Well, for total revenue, it can be calculated as P times Q, right? So one increase while the other decrease, we are also uncertain about the overall change in total revenue. Okay, so how about for statement 2, about the total gains from trade? So a decrease in supply will lead to a decrease in the quantity traded. And when we are talking about the total gains from trade or total economic surplus, the higher the efficient quantity, the larger the total economic surplus, vice versa. So a fall in equilibrium quantity will lead to a decrease in total economic surplus. So statement 2 is actually correct. And by the way, for this kind of question, not only you need to consider the parallel shift in demand supply, and in particular about a non-parallel shift, what I have done here, right? So if you only consider the parallel shift, it will cause you some mistakes in determining the statements. And finally, for statement 3, a rightward shift in demand raises buyers' total expenditure. So rightward shift in demand is actually an increase in demand, which would lead to an increase in price and increase in quantity transacted. And again, total expenditure is calculated by P times Q. Both price and quantity increase here, so total expenditure must increase. So statement 3 is also correct. All right, so that's all for this question, and please take a look at the following problem. Okay, so let's start with question 26. If the government purchases 10,000 slaves back from the market regardless of the price, if the price is at 25, then what is the total quantity demanded? So actually, I'm going to demonstrate two methods to solve question 26. The method one is to find the community quantity demanded first and then add that by the government quantity demanded, which is 10. While for method two is to derive the combined demand curve, the technique that we have introduced in the previous tutorial, and then to find the corresponding quantity demanded with this combined demand curve. So let me go through method one first. So to find the quantity demanded of the community, we just need to plug in the price of 25 back into the demand function. Then we have the corresponding quantity demanded of the community, which is 0.30. And if you are trying to use GeoGebra to help us solve this question, then simply to find an intersection between the community demand, the green one, at the price of 25. So 0.8 will be giving us the community quantity demanded 0.30. And then add that by 10, it would be the total quantity demanded of the community plus the government. We have 10.30 as the answer. How about method two? We need to derive the combined demand curve first, right? So remember, we are summing up quantities instead of prices to derive the combined demand curve. So we need to do the change of subject for the community demand using Q as a subject first, which is the expression here. Add this thing by 10, the government quantity demanded, we have the combined demand curve as this expression. And of course, precisely speaking, the combined demand curve is also king. When the price is higher than 30, then the combined demand curve is given by Q equals to 10. But anyway, let's continue. And we just need to find the intersection between the combined demand curve at the price of 25, okay? So we use the orange demand curve here at the price of 25. So we have the total quantity demanded is 10.30. Actually, the same result as we have found in method one. So for question 27, if the government wants to use a slave buyback program to reduce the quantity of slaves of the community to 0, what would be the quantity of slaves to be bought and also the total expenditure? So to reduce the quantity of slaves in the community to 0, we need to have a high price such that the community is buying 0 units. Okay, how high? The price has to be at least 30, such that the community is buying 0 units, right? The quantity demanded of the community will drop to 0 when the price is at least 30. Okay, so how about the quantity of slaves supplied at the price of 30? We just need to plug in the price of 30 back into the supply curve. Then we would have the quantity supply of slaves, which is 4. Okay, this means that the government would need to buy at least 4,000 slaves from the market. How about the total expenditure? We have the price 30 and the quantity is 4. So total expenditure is just price times quantity. 30 times 4 would give us the total expenditure, $120 million. And finally, question 28, we are going to find the amount that the slave suppliers are willing to spend to lobby the government to adopt the policy they favor. So we have two policies, either slave buyback or the executive order. So under the buyback program, what will be the producer surplus in this case? The producer surplus is actually the blue triangle here. Why? Let's apply the definition of producer surplus, which is total revenue minus total variable cost for our analysis. So under the buyback program, we know that the total revenue is actually the price of 30 multiplied by a quantity of 4. So this purple rectangle is the total revenue, while the total variable cost is simply the area under the supply curve until the quantity traded. Okay, so this orange trapezium. So the purple rectangle minus the orange trapezium will give us the producer surplus under the slave buyback, which is the blue triangle here. So using a polygon function in GeoGebra, you will be able to find out the area, which is 20. Okay, how about the producer surplus under the executive order? It will simply be 0, because under executive order, the quantity traded will drop to zero. So at least in the buyback program, there's positive quantities traded. Okay. So finally, the slave suppliers are willing to pay up to the difference between the produced surplus to lobby the government, which is essentially $20 million. Okay, so that's all for this part, and we'll move on to the last problem in this tutorial. So again, please take a look first. Okay, so let me start with question 21 to find the total quantity supplied at the price of 12.78. So actually, we are going to use two methods again, right? Method one to find the local quantity supplied and then add by the foreign quantity supplied. While for method two is to derive the combined supply curve. So the technique is somehow similar to the previous problem. So let's start with method one. Okay. So by the way, for the foreign quantity supplied, it would be 1 million as far as the price is higher than 11.74. So the price of 12.78, the foreign quantity supply is 1. So the local quantity supply can be found by plugging in the price of 12.78 back into the supply curve, and then we have the corresponding local quantity supply, which is 0.695. And if we are referring to the GeoGebra here, then it is simply the intersection between the local supply curve at the price of 12.78. So 0.8 will be giving us the result, 0.695. And then add that by 1, the foreign quantity supplied. And then we have the total quantity supplied as a result, 1.69. How about method 2? We need to derive the combined supply curve. So how can we do that? We need to do the change of subject for the local supply using Q as a subject first, and we have this expression. Add this by 1, then we have the combined supply curve as this expression. And finally, we just type this in GeoGebra and to find the intersection at the price of 12.78. So a point will be giving us the information, right? 1.695. Again, the same result as in method 1. Okay, so how about question 22? After a successful pilot program, then the government wants to allow unrestricted imports in this small economy. So what will be the market price, the quantity demanded, and the quantity supplied of the local consumers and producers? Okay, so we know that the world price is 11.74. What does that mean? If the local market price is below 11.74, then the world market is not going to supply any units to this economy. Okay, so we just have the local supply. However, when the price reaches to 11.74, then the world can supply infinitely many units to this economy. So this is why at the price of 11.74, we have a horizontal line here. Okay, so the yellow curve here is actually the supply after the economy is open up to trade. So to find out the equilibrium point in this market, it is simply the intersection between the yellow cane curve with the downsloping green demand. So point C would be giving us the local market price and also the quantity demanded of the local consumers. Local market price 11.74 and the local quantity demanded 0.96. How about the local quantity supplied of the local producers? Among these 0.96, some are produced by the local producers, while some are produced by the foreign producers. At the price of 11.74, local producers are only willing to produce these units, okay, up to point D. While for the remaining units, it will be produced by the foreign suppliers. Okay, so this is why we are going to find the corresponding quantity as suggested by point D to find out the local quantity supplied of the local producers. So as you can see, the local quantity supplied of the local producers would be 0.435. All right, so this is about question 22. Well, question 23, given the impact of the unrestricted shirt import, what will be the amounts that local consumers are willing to pay to ban the foreign suppliers for a closed market? So in fact, we need to check. After the market is open up to trade, the local price drops while the local quantity demanded would rise. This means that the consumer surplus increase. Then why does the consumer would like to ban the foreign trade and to go back to the closed market? Right? So this does not make sense. So this is why consumers would prefer an open market, a lower price and a higher quantity demanded. So this is why they would not like to spend any amount for a closed market. So $0 million. Well, for question 24, the local producers are willing to spend up to what amount to go back to a closed market? So obviously, we know that the producer surplus will decrease after they open up the trade. Okay? And specifically, the producer surplus will actually, let me clear here for the drawings. Okay, so how does the producer surplus change after the economy is open up to trade? Originally, the producer surplus would be this red triangle, okay, when the market is closed economy. Well, after the market is open up to trade, then producers are only producing up to point D, right? The price and the quantity suggested by point D. So this means that the producer surplus under this case, okay, after they open up the trade is the purple triangle here. So this explains why the producer surplus will decrease by the blue trapezium here, the blue trapezium here. Okay, and the local producers are willing to pay up to the difference in the producer surplus to lobby the government to close the market. And using the polygon function in GeoGebra, you will be able to find out that the decrease in producer surplus is this amount, right, 1.13. And for a better understanding, as I've just mentioned, the consumer surplus will increase, right? So let's observe how the consumer surplus increase actually. So when the market is closed, then the consumer surplus is actually this red triangle, right? They are consuming up to point E. While if the market is open up to trade, consumers are paying the price and quantity as suggested by point C. So this is why the consumer surplus under this open market is this purple triangle. And in fact, the consumer surplus will increase by the trapezium here. Okay, the trapezium CEFG, CEFG. All right, so this just for your better understanding, and basically that's what I'd like to cover in the tutorial today. So let me open the attendance quiz for you and give you 5 minutes, and I'll close the quiz at around 9:30. Thank you. So 2 minutes left for the attendance exercise. Right, and time is up, and I'll close the quizzes now. Thank you very much for joining the tutorial, and as usual, if you have any questions, you can stay behind and ask them. Thank you.